Lumbridge is probably one of the most iconic towns in old school RuneScape. Everyone starts their journey there, and it is packed with tons of great starter content. I had recently died while poorly trying to AFK brutal black dragons for a slayer task and was teleported back to this town. That was when I suddenly got the inspiration to build a scale model that I could hang on the wall. Seeing as this is no small task, I will be releasing a series of videos of me building this iconic town, and it will give me an opportunity to not only make a really cool piece of art, but also to dive into the lore of the numerous citizens of Lumbridge, as well as the quests that surround this town. After doing some walking around and counting, I determined that a rectangle measuring 56 tiles across and 72 tiles long would capture the town of Lumbridge, while keeping the model to a manageable size. I then had to determine a scale to build the model by, and after some more study, I decided that a tile should measure 4 feet by 4 feet, or for the uncivilized about 1.2 meters by 1.2 meters. After some quick math, I decided on a 1 to 192 scale. So in other words, 1 inch on the model would be equivalent to 192 hypothetical inches in the game. For the tile men out there, the model will consist of a total of 4,032 tiles, as you can see me laboriously marking out on the foam board. With the grid laid out, I began painstakingly wandering Lumbridge and counting tiles so I could accurately mark their positions on the board. Fun fact, the name Lumbridge is based on the actual city of Cambridge, England, where Jagex's headquarters is located, and where the original creators grew up. This model will consist of a total of 9 buildings, not including the castle wall, and these will be built in detail in the coming videos. I used some nails to act as placeholders for the trees that will be added in a later video as I fill the town out. For those curious, in this small section of the map there's a total of 44 trees, including dead trees, regular trees, oak trees, willow trees, and even a yew tree. I took a lighter off camera and burned an indentation in the foam for the river Lum, which will get filled in a later video. I then carefully began to paint some textured paint onto the board to help cover up the grid and give it some more depth. Now with all the grass put on and the roads laid out, you can really start to see the town taking shape. In this episode, I will be tackling the Lumbridge graveyard. Here you can see me cutting out the rough shape of the mausoleum using the foam cutter, as well as some additional strips and pieces that will eventually become the headstones. With some care, I cut out the shape of a cross, and while it isn't perfect, keep in mind that this little cross is only about 3/16 of an inch tall. Taking a length of wire, I began to twist it into the general shape of a yew tree. This is the only yew tree in the main part of Lumbridge, with another 4 located west of the Lumbridge Castle as you head towards Draenor. Yew trees require 60 wood cutting to cut, and according to the 6th volume of the Gillenor Flora series, while all parts of the yew tree are poisonous to some extent, when treated properly, the roots can be used as an ingredient when making Antidote Plus potions, with 68 herbalore. While I let the Mod Podge I put on the yew tree dry, I started to work on the metal fence that surrounds the graveyard. And after cutting some 61 fence posts, I began to glue them in, one at a time, all around the graveyard. Going back to the yew tree now, I put a layer of brown paint on to resemble the trunk of the tree. While the tree dried, I went ahead and painted each of the 19 headstones gray. Now that the paint had finished drying, I very poorly attempted to add the leaves to the tree. Luckily, I eventually got the hang of it. With the fence posts installed and most of the objects made, I start to glue the headstones in place. Unfortunately, while doing this, I made a small mistake. Let me know in the comments if you see what it is. Moving on to the most exciting part of the video, I began working on the mausoleum by first cutting the foam and embossing it with a pen to give the impression of blocks. This mausoleum plays an integral role in the Restless Ghost quest, where you help Father Eric put a ghost that is haunting the graveyard to rest. Fun fact, this quest is one of the first 6 quests that were released at RuneScape's launch way back on January 4th, 2001. It's officially labeled as the third quest released and rewards players with 1 quest point, 1,125 prayer XP, and a Ghost Speak amulet, which you will need to complete 9 other quests, as well as 3 mini quests. With the mausoleum all shaped, I put a coat of Mod Podge on to help solidify the embossings as well as to protect the foam. Once this dried, I put a base coat of black on so that I can dry brush it in the next step and really bring out the details. Interesting fact, you used to be able to teleport to the Lumbridge graveyard with a magic level of 6 while on the Arceus spellbook, using 1 Law Rune and 2 Earth Runes. But this spell was eventually replaced with the Arceus Library teleport on April 28th of 2021. With the crypt painted, it's time to finish the rest of the graveyard, adding the several bushes and brush. There are a couple of NPCs that call Lumbridge Graveyard home, including Nigel and Count Check, as well as an entrance to Death's office. I will be going more in depth on these characters in a later episode when I add the citizens of Lumbridge to the model. As you walk through Lumbridge, heading southeast, you'll see a lonely building amongst a host of gravestones. With the graveyard built, you can really start to imagine the town coming together. If you're interested in watching the town of Lumbridge grow, as I continue to add to it in the coming episodes, and learn about the interesting facts and lore surrounding this town, go ahead and like and subscribe. In case you don't remember, this model is approximately 56 tiles across and 72 tiles long. I felt like this captured the main part of Lumbridge while keeping the model to a manageable size. The scale of the model is 1 to 192, so in other words, 1 inch is equivalent to 192 theoretical inches in the game. In this episode, I will be tackling the Cooking Tutors building and Bob's Brilliant Axes. I started by cutting the rough shapes of the buildings out using a foam cutter. set up my angle guide on my wire cutter and cut the roofs of the buildings out after doing a little trigonometry to calculate the correct pitch of each roof. As you can see, I did have a little trouble while cutting out the smaller roof sections, but eventually I prevailed. And here's a rough layout of the two buildings. I began with the cooking tutor's house by marking out the doorway so I could avoid it in the next steps as I began to cut and emboss the blocks. Here you can see a crazy contraption I made to help me cut the stones out on the buildings. It consists of a bolt with 10 razor blades and washers between these to get the correct spacing. Not exactly the safest tool, as there isn't really a good way to grab it, but it is very effective. Inside this building, you'll find Cordero, the cooking tutor, as well as one of the 2 cooking ranges located in Lumbridge. For those of you who are monolingual, such as myself, Cordero is actually Spanish for lamb. The RuneScape developers actually sprinkle in tons of these play on words throughout the game if you look for it. When you talk to him, he'll explain how to make various foodstuffs such as pizzas, pies, and curries. Unfortunately, with tools such as the old school RuneScape wiki page, the cooking tutor is pretty much dead content, but go ahead and give him a visit though. I've been playing RuneScape for about 18 years now and never knew what was in this building until I started making the series. With the embossing done, you can really start to see the building take shape. I did forget to cut the 2 windows out on the back, but I corrected this mistake later on in the video. I went ahead and glued the roof on now and used the end of a mechanical pencil to emboss shingles onto it. Moving on now to Bob's Brilliant Axe Shop, I again started by marking out the doors as well as the windows so I could avoid cutting these sections with my new brick cutting tool. I then did the same process on what I assume is Bob's attached living quarters. with all the bricks embossed, I glued the 3 sections together. Then moving on to attaching the roofs. While I let that dry, I decided to move over to the swamp area, and went ahead and loaded my airbrush up with some darker green, so I could color the grass in the swamp area. Moving back to finish embossing Bob's Brilliant Axe Shop, I went ahead and used the same method as I used on the Cooking Tutors building. Next, I coated both buildings in Mod Podge to strengthen the foam and lock the embossings in place. While I let that dry, I went ahead and tackled the 6 dead trees that show up in the swamp area on this model. Using a length of wire, I twisted each tree into the general shape of a dead tree. I then dipped each in Mod Podge off camera to help fill in some of the wire gaps. While I let those trees dry, I put a base coat of black onto each of the buildings to get them ready to be dry brushed later. Moving right along to the fence that separates the main town of Lumbridge from the Lumbridge Swamp, I took some small strips of polystyrene and then meticulously glued each of the fence posts in place, leaving a few long to help better attach the fence to the board later on. Off camera, I spray painted the trees brown, then taking some dark brown wash, went over each of the trees to darken them up some. I then carefully glued each into place. While these are dead trees, they do still yield a regular log when cut down. Now with the black base coat dry, I can begin to bring out the details using a painting technique called dry brushing. Next, I painted the roofs of the buildings, and while I made the roofs a little more orange than they are in game, I still think it captures the idea of the buildings well. As you watch me paint out some of the details on the buildings, I'll take this time to give a little more information on Bob, the owner of Bob's Brilliant Axes. While his store is somewhat lacking in use for most players, except maybe some Iron Men early on, who may go there to buy a steel axe, which Bob sells for a very competitive rate of 200 GP, which by the way is the cheapest of the 4 vendors that sells steel axes. He does offer a very valuable service though, in that he can repair Barrow's equipment. Bob is one of only 5 NPCs that can perform this service, and this is invaluable for players that have not yet reached 55 construction to build an armor stand in their player-owned house. It is quite a bit more expensive though to have Bob repair your Barrow's equipment, so if you haven't reached 55 construction yet, here's your call to action to get it done, because it will save you a lot of GP in the long run. With the fence dry, I can actually start placing everything onto the model. Nearly forgetting Bob's Brilliant Axes sign, I quickly made one using polystyrene and foam. And with that, a couple more buildings and trees are added to the model. These awesome additions further bring this model and this iconic town to life. Many of you guys in the comments have been wanting a little more detail about the process and what I'm doing, so I'll try and elaborate a little more in this episode and those to come. But today, I will be constructing the Lumbridge Church. Here I am using the hot wire foam cutter to get the rough shape of the church cut out. While the hot wire cutter isn't a necessity for model making, it's definitely a great investment for anyone looking to get into the hobby, because it really makes cutting blocks and other geometric shapes a lot easier and more accurate. With the pieces of the church cut out, I went ahead and moved to making the fence that surrounds the church using a plastic material called polystyrene. You can get polystyrene in a variety of shapes and sizes, and it can be found in most hobby stores. I went ahead and pre-cut all the pieces I would need to speed the process up a little, leaving the end posts long so as to provide an easy method of attaching the fences to the model. It is usually a good idea to pre-punch the holes that the post will go into to make it easier to glue into place and reduce the chance of breaking fragile pieces, since you don't have to use as much force to put it in. With the fence knocked out, I went back to working on the church, first by marking out the doors and windows so I don't accidentally cut these areas with my special brick cutting tool I made for the last video. As you watch me emboss the details onto the building, I'll take this time to provide some fun facts and lore surrounding this 230-year-old church. The Lumbridge Church is referred to by Father Eric, the priest that maintains it, as the Church of Holy Cerdomin. It hosts two notable NPCs. The first, Father Eric, as I previously mentioned, as well as the prayer tutor Yakomi, who can provide basic information on what prayer is used for in the game, as well as how to level it. Players will need to visit this church during several quests, including the Restless Ghost, the Lost Tribe, and Death to the Dorgashan. Father Eric is also the solution to a medium anagram clue, as well as an elite cryptic clue. One other thing of note is the church has an organ which can be played, and it sounds pretty cool, so definitely stop by and try it out sometime. With the bricks and windows cut out, I went ahead and glued all the pieces together, including the roof. With the church all put together, I went ahead and did some final details on the bricks before moving to embossing the roof tiles. This is a good example of how anything can be used as an embossing tool. I'm using the end of a carpenter's mechanical pencil to impress half-round shingles onto the roof. Lastly, I wanted to emboss the stained glass windows so that I would have somewhat of a guide when I painted it in a later step. I used a very fine tip pen to basically draw the design onto each window, and since the pen tip was so fine, it made a very sharp impression on the foam that would still show up even after priming. With the embossing finished, it's time to put a coat of matte Mod Podge all over the foam. This is a water-based glue that dries clear, and it helps to seal and protect the foam, as well as lock the embossing in place. Many model makers will mix the Mod Podge with black acrylic paint so that they can skip the next step where I prime the model black, but I prefer not to do this as I don't always prime my models black, so this just gives me a little more flexibility with my base color. Here I prime the model black. This will provide a base for the next step when I dry brush the model. You can use different base colors to achieve different effects, such as if I used a gray for my primer, it would result in a much brighter looking brickwork, more akin to the bricks you would see in Falador. Now that the primer is dry, I utilized a painting technique called dry brushing. Dry brushing is a great way to bring the details out on the embossing. It's a pretty simple technique where you get some paint on your brush, then basically rub most of it off onto a paper towel until you're left with very little paint on the bristles that you can then dust onto the model. Since there is such a little amount of paint on your brush, it doesn't seep into the details. Moving right along onto the roof, I went ahead and painted it to match Bob's axes and the cooking tutor. While I wait for the roof to dry, I moved on to painting the stained glass windows. You may notice I missed the two windows next to the main window, but I eventually remembered them and painted them off camera. You can see that there are several Saradomin stars depicted on the stained glass. I actually have a dedicated video to the lore surrounding Saradomin, so if you're interested in learning a little more about this old school RuneScape god, you can go ahead and check that out on my channel. If you're more interested in seeing some more RuneScape crafts, I actually have a video of me making a holy symbol as well on my channel. Either way, I think this church adds some much needed color to the model. Now moving back to finish the roof, I dry brushed it to bring the details out, and then went around the eaves and painted them a dark brown. With the whole southeastern corner of the town filled out, you can really see the model coming together. Be sure to tune in for part 5 in the next couple weeks as I move north and tackle a very exciting part of the model. Today I will be working on the River Lum as well as the Goblin area. Here you can see me cutting out the rough shape of the Goblin house using a hot wire foam cutter. This hot wire foam cutter is invaluable when making lots of accurate cuts, and while they are a little expensive, usually ranging between $60 and $150, they do save you a lot of X-Acto blades in the long run. Moving on to the trees now, using a length of wire, I twisted it into the general shape of the tree. In this area of the model, there's a total of 16 trees, not including the canoe tree, 9 of those being dead trees, 5 regular trees, and 2 oak trees. Finishing the rest of the trees off camera, I went back to the Goblin house and cut out the crumbling walls on the eastern side by hand. With all the building pieces cut out now, it is time to mark the doors and windows so I can avoid cutting those areas with my special brick cutting tool. This is my special brick cutting tool that I made for part 2 of the series to save me time as well as give me a more uniform brickwork. It consists of a bolt with razor blades sandwiched between 2 nuts, and washers between those to provide uniform spacing. I carefully used it to score the foam all the way around the building. Now using a regular pen to emboss the foam along the lines I cut. Cutting the foam allows for a more precise and deep indentation, and any number of things can be used to trace along these cuts, each giving a different effect. So if you're interested in making your own models, be sure to experiment and find what works best for you. With all of the brickwork embossed on the building and the crumbling walls attached, I went ahead and glued the roof into place. Inside the Goblin house, you can find an iron dagger spawn, which can be a quick upgrade for any new Iron Man just starting out. Players will also need to search the boxes in this building during an easy cryptic clue. Now using a mechanical carpenter's pencil, I embossed semicircle shingles all over the roof, before taking an X-Acto knife and touching up the brickwork on the gables. With the Goblin house all embossed, it was time to get the bridge cut out and shaped. With the lower section carved out to match the riverbed, I went ahead and sketched the bridge deck, so I would have a guide when cutting it out. I then traced the profile of the bridge onto a thin piece of foam, so I could get the guardrails cut out. With the bridge all cut out, I started embossing it using a very fine tip pen to draw a cobblestone effect all over the bridge. Moving back to getting the trees ready, I began by gluing each tree to a short nail. This will make the trees much easier to handle for the following steps, and will also provide a solid anchor when I eventually attach them to the model. With the trees all glued into place and the buildings embossed, it's time to cover everything in a coat of matte Mod Podge. Mod Podge is a water-based glue that is very popular among hobbyists, and you can get it at Walmart or most any hobby store. This glue will help protect the foam as well as lock any embossing in place, and will also help fill some of the wire gaps on the trees to make the trunks smoother. Once everything was dry, I went ahead and primed the buildings black to prepare them for the next step in the painting process. I also primed the trees brown with some spray paint off camera. You could technically prime the foam buildings using a spray paint as well, since they are covered in a shell of Mod Podge, but I usually avoid this unless I'm making a large piece, since even with the Mod Podge coating, sometimes the spray paint solvents can still damage the fine embossing. Now that the trees are dry, I used a dark brown wash on the dead trees to darken them up some, as they are a bit darker than regular trees in the game. To add the leaves to the trees, I'm using what is called clump foliage. It comes in a lot of different colors. Here you can see I have 3 different colors mixed together, and it's basically just a painted spongy material. With all of the trees done, it's time to paint the Goblin house and bridge. Utilizing a painting technique called dry brushing, I dust brighter and brighter shades of gray onto the buildings to give them more depth. Dry brushing is a very useful technique to know when making models, and you can find numerous tutorials on YouTube about it if you're interested in doing it yourself. Going back with a fine brush, I painted some additional details, including the hole in the wall, the windows, as well as the door. This area of Lumbridge has about 50 goblin spawns, and they provide a great place for many new players to start leveling their combat skills. They are also very helpful for players who have not yet finished Prince Ally Rescue and find themselves short coins to get into Alcarid. If you're interested in hearing more about these Bandosian followers, I actually have a Bandos lore video that goes into more detail about the Goblin questline. Moving to the roof, I start by painting it a dark blue, as I intend to dry brush it as well. It's usually good to start with a dark base color when dry brushing, since that method is usually good at highlighting raised sections. Then, to finish the roof, I painted all the eaves a dark brown. As I wait for everything to finish drying, I started to work on the river, first by painting the riverbed blue so I won't have to add as much dye in the epoxy later. With everything dry, it was time to add everything to the model. Nearly forgetting the canoe tree, I quickly made it off camera. Members can start using this unique transport system at level 12 woodcutting, and unlock all 6 stops at level 57 woodcutting. These stops include Lumbridge, the Champions Guild, Barbarian Village, Edgeville, Ferox Enclave, and the Wilderness Pond. With everything glued into place, I went and touched up the pathway leading to the bridge. Now, to finish preparing the river for the epoxy, I added several tufts of grass and boulders to it to best match the various reeds and rocks in the game. Some interesting facts about the River Lum: it actually gets its name from the real-life River Came, which flows through Cambridge in eastern England. It also spans some 480 tiles, which would make it 10 feet or about 3 meters long using our model scale of 1 to 192. I went ahead and mixed the two-part epoxy off camera and gave it a slight blue tint using some ink. I was a little heavy-handed with my pour and actually ended up needing to scoop some of it out with a stick. In this section of the river, you can catch 3 different types of fish, including trout, pike, and salmon. With the river level where I wanted it, I used a lighter to pop any air bubbles as they rose to the surface. Once the river was finished curing, I wanted to make it look like it was actually flowing, so I took some gloss Mod Podge and dabbed it all over the river. This is a perfect example of trusting the process because it looks like I absolutely ruined the river, but Mod Podge actually dries clear. With the river covered, I took a straw and blew air onto the glue to make a rippling effect. After a couple hours, you can see the results. I felt like this really sold the illusion of flowing water and gave the river some additional depth. I purchased some 1 to 200 scale people on Amazon to use for the goblins. I tried to 3D print them, but they were just too small, and honestly I don't really have a ton of experience 3D printing, so that didn't help either. I also made some ducks using oven-baked clay and a small file to define the shapes better afterwards. Enjoy watching me attempt to paint these tiny figures. While I wait for all that to dry, I made a little section of the cow fence that shows up in the corner of the model. As in the previous videos, I made this fence using a plastic material called polystyrene. And with that, another section of Lumbridge is finished, getting us one step closer to finishing this iconic town. To help you guys visualize the truly tiny scale of this model, I placed a couple LEGO minifigures next to the buildings. For those of you who aren't familiar with LEGO figures, they stand approximately 1.5 inches tall, or 4 centimeters tall. Lumbridge is probably one of the most iconic towns in old school RuneScape. In this series, I will be working to build a scale model of it. For those new to the series, and to those returning, welcome. I really appreciate all the support we've received on the series so far. In case you don't remember, this model is approximately 56 tiles across and 72 tiles long. I felt like this captured the main part of Lumbridge while keeping the model to a manageable size. The scale of this model is 1 to 192, and as you watch, I will be explaining some of the modeling process as well as giving some interesting lore about the area that I am working on. Today, I'll be working on the Lumbridge Blacksmith. Here you can see me cutting the rough shape of the Blacksmith using a hot wire foam cutter. You guys have seen me use this in every episode of this series thus far, and I was curious if you enjoyed me going in depth on the modeling process every episode, even if I tend to repeat much of what I said in the previous episode, or if I should just cover new modeling techniques as they come up throughout the series. Anyways, let me know down in the comments as I try to use your feedback to help me improve the upcoming videos. This will be an exciting episode for many of you, as I have decided to model the interior of the blacksmith as well, seeing as there are no doors on the building. I used a plastic material called polystyrene to construct the fence that surrounds the building. Here you can see my special brick cutting tool that I made back in part 2 to help speed up the process, as well as make more uniform brickwork. This tool will henceforth be referred to as the Brick Cutter 1000, as I have begun development on the Brick Cutter 2000, which I hope to have finished in time to use on the Lumbridge Castle. I had to be extra careful with the depth at which I cut the lines for the brickwork, so as to not cut through it since I had to do it on both sides of the foam. I then used a regular pen to emboss the cuts. With the bricks embossed on both the interior and exterior of the building, I moved on to embossing the roof using a mechanical carpenter's pencil. Since the interior of this building will be visible, I had to take some gray paint and cover up the grid that marks the location on the model. Using some matte Mod Podge, I applied it all over the roof and walls to help protect the foam and prepare it for the primer in the next step. Next, I worked on the interior of the Blacksmith. I cut the countertops out of a large sheet of polystyrene, then made the counters from some foam. I cut the furnace out of a small block of foam as well, and embossed it to give it some extra detail. This is one of only 30 furnaces in the whole game, and is located 85 tiles from the bank atop Lumbridge Castle, or 93 tiles from the Colomancer's chest. With the interior furniture attached to the walls, I came up with the idea of making a removable roof. Since to this point in time, I had been planning on gluing the roof in place and only being able to see the interior through the two small doorways. I planned to achieve this using several carefully placed magnets, and after getting a lot of super glue on my fingers, I eventually managed to get the magnets glued in place. With the construction of the building nearly finished, I needed to add the shutters to it before priming. It's hard to see in the video, but I actually have made small cuts along this shutter panel, which should show up during the painting process to give the illusion of the slats. Taking some black acrylic paint, I primed the whole building to prepare it for dry brushing in the next step. Utilizing a technique called dry brushing, I progressively dusted brighter and brighter grays onto the building to give the brickwork more depth. It's usually a good idea to do dry brushing first, as it can be somewhat messy and sometimes hard to avoid smaller details, such as the shutters in this case. Now going back, I touched up the shutters, counters, and other small details. This blacksmith is one of the few in-game that has both a furnace and an anvil in very close proximity. Unfortunately, the anvil is rusted, and players can only smith bronze items on it, making it really only useful for new players. The furnace, though it has no restrictions, there are many better options nearer to a bank for both free-to-play and members, so you rarely see anyone actually using it. With the painting complete, it was time to glue everything in place on the model. I was actually pretty excited about making this blacksmith, as I actually enjoy smithing on old school RuneScape. I am currently level 93 smithing on my group Iron Man, and it has been an invaluable skill for manufacturing bolts for me and my friend. Here is the smithing apprentice, Fioraz, which is an Irish name that means rock. He isn't particularly helpful. He basically just tells you that you can smith bronze bars on the anvil outside, and that if you want any more help, you need to talk to his master, Sani, in Barrock. When you examine him, it gives you the text, Fioraz looks a bit fiery. And with the last few final touches made, we are that much closer to completing this scale model of Lumbridge. I unfortunately forgot to record myself making the barrels and rusted anvil, but they are there. Today, I will be working on the Lumbridge General Store, as well as the Sheared Ram Bar. I unfortunately did not record using the hot wire foam cutter for this episode, so we're just going to jump right into the embossing. Here you can see I have the General Store cut out. Using a fine tip pen, I mark the doors and all the windows so I can avoid cutting those areas in the next step. Here's the Brick Cutter 1000. I unfortunately haven't had time to work on the Brick Cutter 2000, but hopefully I can get it built before I make the castle walls. I use this to score the foam all around the building, then taking a regular pen and embossing the foam along the lines. I then meticulously scored and embossed the brick pattern all over the building. This is one of 56 general stores in the game. General stores are a unique type of shop and are particularly useful for Ironmen, as you can sell any tradable item there. They do generally offer a lower price than specialty stores though. We also really wanted to express our gratitude to you guys for nominating us not once, but twice for the Golden Gnomes. I did not think there was even a remote chance of getting nominated, and it's really just surreal to see your content displayed on the official website of a game that you've been playing for nearly 2 decades. So thank you guys again for the support. With the brickwork finished, I moved on to the roof. The general store has by far the most convoluted roof in all of Lumbridge. This is just one of those weird details you never notice until you try and build the Tile Accurate model. But check it out next time you're running by it. I cut a couple of the roof pieces a little bit big so I can mock them up and mark them on the model to best fit the angles of the building. New players can find many essential tools sold here. I tried to figure out what the shopkeeper and shop assistant's names were, but was unsuccessful. If you head upstairs, you'll find Abigaila, who is a refugee from Mauritania, and if you speak to her with no items in your inventory, and you are not poisoned or diseased, then you can spectate participants within the Theater of Blood. With the general store basically finished, I moved to working on the bar. I again marked the doors and windows and embossed the building in the same process as I did on the general store several minutes ago. In the sheared ram, there are two notable NPCs, the first being Vios, who is an adventurer from Great Kurend and is involved in quite a few quests, including X Marks the Spot, Client of Kurend, A Kingdom Divided, and Dragon Slayer 2. The second notable NPC is Arthur the Clue Hunter, who gives general information about clue scrolls, and you can also speak to him to toggle whether or not you want to receive clue scrolls while skilling. With both the buildings built, I quickly touched up the general store roof before embossing both the roofs with a mechanical carpenter's pencil. With all of the embossing finished, it's time to seal and protect the foam with some matte Mod Podge. This is a water-based glue that dries clear, and it really helps lock the fine embossing in place. Once they finished drying, I primed both buildings with some black acrylic paint to prepare them for the next step in the painting process. With the primer dry, it's time to utilize a very popular painting technique among model hobbyists called dry brushing. Using a larger brush and rubbing most of the paint off onto a paper towel, I dust progressively lighter shades of gray onto the building. This technique works really well when painting lots of very small details because it only puts the paint on the raised areas. Since the paint is so quote-unquote dry, it can't seep into the crevices. With the brickwork painted, I go back to touch up the details like the doors and windows. Next, I painted both the roofs. While I waited for them to dry, I began working on the small section of the fence that makes up the sheep's pen in the corner of the model. I utilized a material called polystyrene. This is a very handy material as it comes in numerous shapes and sizes and is easy to cut and sand. For those of you who've been following the series for a while now, You'll recognize this material from nearly every part of this series so far. With the fence built, I decided to start chipping away at the 17 trees that I needed to make for this section of the model. As seen in previous videos, I made them by twisting wire into the general shape of a tree. I did not record making each one, as I made them over several days whenever I found a few minutes of free time. Once I got all the trees made, which included 1 dead tree, 12 regular trees, 2 oak trees, and 2 willow trees, I glued each to a short nail, which will provide support when I attach them to the model. I dipped each one into some Mod Podge to fill in some of the gaps created by the individual strands of wire. Moving back to finish up the buildings, I painted several details, including the eaves and window frames. I also did a little dry brushing on the roofs to bring out the shingles. I painted all the trees and fence off camera with some brown spray paint, and with the paint dry, it was time to add the leaves to each of the trees. I used this spongy material called clump foliage. You can get this in a variety of colors, and as you can see, I actually have 3 different colors mixed up into a pencil box. And now for the exciting part. With all the big components painted, it's time to attach the buildings and trees to the model. Before the sheared ram was added in February of 2019, there was actually a house in this spot that was replaced by the bar. Let me know in the comments if you remember that house. With the buildings, trees, and fence all glued into place, I went and made several signs using polystyrene that will really help bring this model together. Once all the glue dried, I began painting the very fine details onto each of the signs. The sheared ram was thus named because of many new players will accidentally try to shear a ram during the sheep shearer quest. And with that, another section of this iconic town is finished. At this point, most of the town is filled out, and most of you can probably assume what's next, so needless to say, I am super excited to start working on the centerpiece of this model. I do want to forewarn everyone though, the castle is going to be split into 3 parts. I originally planned on doing it in 2 parts, but I am currently taking 13 credit hours at school this semester and working 36 hours a week, so Unfortunately, I don't always have a lot of time to work on the model. Luckily, my friend makes all of the shorts and puts together and edits every video, so that's the only reason we have been able to get a video out every other week. But anyways, that is why I made the decision to split it into 3 parts to give me more time so I don't have to skimp out on any of the numerous details in and around the castle. In case you don't remember, this model is approximately 56 tiles across and 72 tiles long. I felt like this captured the main part of Lumbridge while keeping the model to a manageable size. The scale of the model is 1 to 192, and as you watch, I will be explaining some of the modeling process as well as giving some interesting lore about the area that I'm working on. Today, I will be working on the Lumbridge Castle Gatehouse and the Castle Cellar. So there's been a lot of comments throughout the series so far pointing out that the Lumbridge Castle is in fact on a hill, so I've decided to rectify that mistake I made when initially laying out the town by adding a hill. I did this by taking some foam and cutting it to the rough sides of the hill. I then took and laid a grid out on the foam so I could line the castle up right before carving out the hill slope. I haven't really talked much about this foam in the series, so I thought it would be good to cover it since I've used it basically on every part of this model. It's actually another form of extruded polystyrene, like the stuff I use to make the fences. It's commonly referred to as XPS foam board insulation, and it comes in a variety of thicknesses and colors, such as green, pink, and blue. It is typically available at home improvement stores such as Lowe's and Home Depot. I was able to get a smaller piece measuring 2 foot by 2 foot by 1 inch thick for about $10 from Lowe's that was being advertised as a project panel. It's very popular among hobbyists because it holds its shape well, it is easy to carve and cut, and is relatively cheap. With the hill all carved out, it was time to move to the gatehouse. I went ahead and marked out the doors and the arrow slits before taking the Brick Cutter 1000 and scoring the foam all the way around. While I was scoring the second building, my finger kinda slipped on the Brick Cutter 1000 and it cut 3 perfect rows into my fingertip. Unfortunately, the only band-aids I could find were the ones my wife had bought. This just highlights the necessity to complete the Brick Cutter 2000, which will have additional safety features. I have made some progress on it, so look out for it in the next episode. With the scoring finished, I took a regular ballpoint pen and traced along each line to emboss the foam. I then took an X-Acto knife and cut each brick. I moved back to working on the castle hill and mixed up some paint, Mod Podge, and some sand to make a muddy paint just like I did on the first part of this series. I painted it all around the hill while avoiding where the actual castle is going to sit. While that was drying, I went back to working on the gatehouse. Taking some thin polystyrene sheeting, I cut the shape of the gatehouse roof. This will tie the 2 towers together and give a base for the parapet to sit on. Taking some thin pieces of foam I had cut earlier, I cut them to the shape of the model to make the parapet. With most of the foam work finished on the gatehouse, I went back to the castle hill to glue the grass on. I'm using a material called static grass. It comes in a variety of colors and lengths. For instance, I'm using a 2mm length grass, since this is such a small scale model. The grass itself is typically made from dyed nylon or rayon fibers, and the tool you'll see me shaking the grass out of is imaginatively called a static grass applicator, and this tool basically charges the grass fibers in the applicator, and then by using the alligator clip to ground the part that you want to put the grass on, so when the grass comes out of the applicator it is attracted to the piece and will actually make the grass stand up on end, which helps enhance the illusion of grass. Then, when I take the grounding clip off and touch the grating, this is just discharging the static charge. If you touch the grating with your finger before discharging it, it will discharge into your finger and give you a good shock. If you're new to modeling or don't want to buy one of these tools, you can actually get a similar effect by using a balloon and charging it on some carpet, then holding it close to your freshly glued on grass, and this will also make the grass stand up on end. While I waited for the grass on the hill to dry, I went ahead and put a coat of Mod Podge on the gatehouse to seal and protect the foam. So I decided to do some of the interior of the castle, since there has been an overwhelming number of requests asking for the interior to be modeled. And since I was adding the castle hill, it provided a perfect opportunity to do the castle cellar. Unfortunately, while laying it out, I found out that the cellar actually extends past the hill, so I will only be able to model some of the cellar. With the general shape of the cellar cut out, I used the Brick Cutter 1000 to cut the cellar brickwork out before taking an X-Acto knife and pen to emboss all of the individual bricks. With the major structures built and cut out, it was time to start making all of the decorations. I bought a thin piece of brass from the hobby store and cut a few strips out, then cut them into squares. I then sketched a rough shape of a shield as a guide so I could cut the bottom corners off. And once I had cut the shape, I gave them a little bend by pinching them in my pliers. I also cut out a couple of banners and bent them around a small file handle to create a rippling effect so they would look like they're moving, like they do in the game. As you watch me painstakingly glue each of these shields and banners to the gatehouse, I'll mention an NPC that hangs out on the bottom floor of the southern gatehouse. Purdue is a traveling dwarven merchant who always seems to have what you've lost, meaning he will sell you back quest items that you have either lost or destroyed, as well as achievement diary items, for a price of course. Many of these items you can get back by other means for free or cheaper, but he's usually much more convenient, and you can actually find him in 7 other locations throughout Gielinor. The walls were still missing a few details, so I took some polystyrene tubing and used it to make a couple cannons. I didn't really have anything that would work good for the wheels on the cannons, so I just cut some rough circles from some polystyrene sheeting. And luckily the cannons never moved, so the roundness of the wheels wasn't very crucial. With the cannons glued into place, I sketched out and cut a couple bronze pickaxes. These 2 pickaxes spawn up here, and they are very handy as an Iron Man if you need to get a pickaxe real quick. With all of the bits and pieces glued into place, I went ahead and primed the whole thing black. I went ahead and primed the cellar walls as well while I was at it. Once the primer had dried, I utilized a painting technique called dry brushing to paint the brickwork on the gatehouse. It's typically a good idea to dry brush first when painting a small model because it can be a bit messy and hard to avoid small details. With the dry brushing finished, I began to paint all of the individual details with a very fine brush. Lumbridge Castle is the starting point for many quests, and I'll cover those more when I actually begin modeling the upper floors of the castle, but the cellar still has a couple notable features, such as the Colomancer chest, which becomes visible to players who have started the Recipe for Disaster quest. It is a multifunctional chest, acting as both a store and a bank, with the store getting increasingly more stock as you complete the various subquests for the Recipe for Disaster. There is also a tribe of subterranean goblins called the Dorgashun, whose city can be accessed through a crack in the cellar wall. It's also worth mentioning that there are several item spawns in the cellar, including leather boots, a knife, and cabbage. Once I had gotten all of the little details painted on the gatehouse, it was time to glue it into place on the model. Definitely one of my favorite buildings so far. Next, it was time to glue the castle hill into place. Probably should have scraped some of the grass off of the base because I ended up having to hold it down for a while to get it to stay. It was time to fill the cellar up with furniture because it looked very empty. I made several tables, walls, and the sink out of foam. There are 6 shelving units down in the cellar, and I made them using a combination of foam and polystyrene sheeting. These are probably one of the most frustrating pieces of furniture that I've made for the series so far. I ended up with a lot of super glue on my fingers, but they ended up turning out alright. I didn't end up filming myself making this statue, but I thought it turned out really well. It will end up going in front of the gatehouse. I then did a quick and dirty paint job on the rest of the furniture, which I had primed brown off camera. With all of the furniture painted and dried, it was time to start gluing everything into place. As I mentioned earlier in the video, I was unfortunately not able to model the entire cellar since it extends past the hill in the game. So unfortunately, you won't see the Colomancer chest or the entrance to the Dorgish and Goblins. At this point, I had realized I sort of messed up because I had just started gluing everything in without test fitting it, and hadn't really taken into account that the model walls were significantly thicker than the in-game walls, so it is a little cramped, but I still think it portrays the cellar well. I then placed a few final touches on the gatehouse. You may notice that there's an empty statue plinth in front of the southern tower, and that is because during the Garden of Tranquility quest, you actually steal this statue of a former king and put it in the Queen of Varrock's garden. I actually have a quest cape on my group Iron Man, so I have completed this quest, hence the missing statue. And there you have it, another section of this iconic town is finished. I think the blue Lumbridge heraldry adds a nice splash of color to the model. today, I'll be working on the Lumbridge Castle walls, as well as adding some of the citizens of Lumbridge. So I've finally made some progress on the Brick Cutter 2000. It is not completely finished, but as you can see, it will not require any blood offerings like the Brick Cutter 1000 did. I already had several strips of foam cut out that will make up the walls, and I went ahead and scored each side using the Brick Cutter 2000. I then took a regular ballpoint pen and traced along each of the lines to define the embossing. Next, I painstakingly cut and embossed each of the bricks. For those that are curious, there will end up being roughly 24 inches of wall on the model, so with 7 rows of bricks on each side and each brick being approximately 1/4 of an inch wide, I ended up embossing just over 1,300 bricks. You may also notice that I have made an artistic decision to make the crenulations square, even though in the game they are made up of numerous tiny crosses. It just wasn't really feasible to do that on this small of a scale. Taking a break from embossing bricks, I moved to working on the numerous citizens of Lumbridge. Using some 1 to 200 scale train figures that I had purchased as a base, I took some 2-part epoxy that many hobbyists commonly refer to as green stuff, and used it to add capes, hats, and beards to some of the figures. I haven't ever actually used this epoxy putty before, so I quickly discovered as I tried to roll it out that it wanted to stick to the cutting board. So I ended up sticking some on the figures, then pulling it off to create a thin cape-like effect. After struggling for a while, I was able to create some passable effects on many of the figures, and use some small pieces of wire to create stabs on several of them. Once the epoxy putty dried, I gave them all a coating of black primer to get them ready to paint. Hopefully at this point you've figured out that I'm painting Nigel, the dead man tutor. You can find him roaming around in the Lumbridge graveyard, and he will give you various information about dead man mode. And if you have some blood money laying around in your bank, you can use it on him and he will give you a piece of dead man armor, which is purely cosmetic. Now that I have some paint on them, you might be able to tell who a few of them are now. Keep in mind these figures are extremely small, only measuring 3/8 of an inch or 9.5 millimeters in height, so there'll be some sacrifice of detail at this scale. I probably could have gotten a little more detail, but there sometimes comes a point when you're building a model that you need to ask yourself, have I captured the essence of what I'm trying to model? If the answer is yes, then it's time to move on, because sometimes you can get so bogged down focusing on the tiniest of details that you won't ever finish the piece. I was able to finish embossing the wall sections over several days and began to mock up and glue the wall together on the model. Once all the wall pieces had dried, I took it off the model and gave it a coating of Mod Podge, being careful not to break the wall. The Mod Podge will help protect the foam and embossings, as well as give some additional rigidity. I then cut the door opening at the back of the castle wall. Leave a comment if you remember a time when this door didn't exist. You had to run all the way around to get to the back of the castle. This doorway was added on October 9th of 2014 as a quality of life update to make the tree farming patch more accessible. With the Mod Podge dry, it was time to prime the wall black to get it ready for dry brushing later. While I waited for the primer to dry, I had several trees to make. If you've been following the series for a while now, you've seen me make trees in nearly every episode. I take and twist a small length of wire into the general shape of a tree before dipping it into Mod Podge to smooth out the trunks. While the trees dry, I went ahead and utilized a painting technique called dry brushing, where you take a very small amount of paint and dust it onto the model, so it only highlights the raised details of the embossing. I stuck several pieces of wire into the board that will help strengthen and support the wall when I glue it in place. It's really starting to look like a true castle now. With the wall in place, it was time to attach all the citizens to the model, starting with Count Check, who can give you advice on securing your account, and if you have not yet entered the Stronghold of Security, he can provide you with a one-time teleport there. Next we have Hadius Cosantes, who will give you your rewards for completing the Lumbridge Drainer Diary. His outfit is worth roughly 1.3 bill, and he claims to have obtained it all from only 3 clue scrolls. Then there is Phileas the Lumbridge Guide, and he can provide new players with useful information. The Doomsayer, who you can speak to about toggling warning messages. Hans, who can cheerfully tell you how much of your life you spent on old school RuneScape. The Iron Man tutor, Adam, who you can talk to about getting Iron Man armor, as well as downgrading your Iron Man status. Next we have the 3 combat tutors, Harlan, Makasi, and Namarti, who can provide new players with some starter combat gear. Harlan can also sell players who have achieved 99 defense, a defense skill cape. Wilfred, the woodcutting tutor, he will provide you with a bronze axe and tinderbox if you don't already have them, and he will also sell players a woodcutting skill cape if they have achieved 99 woodcutting. Then there's Donnie, a local farmer who can tell players where to find quests that train cooking and combat. The League's tutor, who runs the League's reward shop. And lastly, I put in several women and men. A couple of honorable mentions include Adventurer John, which I did not know was there because I've been mapping Lumbridge out on my Iron Man, and it turns out he's not visible to Iron Man. And then there's Guy, which is basically a male version of Donnie, who will give players information on quests that train cooking and combat. With everyone glued in place, it was time to finish the last trees of the model. For those counting, I have made a total of 45 trees, including the canoe tree. If you were to cut down each one of these trees once in-game, you would receive a total of 1,397.5 woodcutting experience. With basically everything in place, there are two final pieces that still need to be made, the fountains. I had a small scrap piece of walnut laying around, so I went ahead and turned a couple of tiny fountains on the lathe. After priming them black, I went ahead and gave them both a quick dry brush paint job to create that stone effect, then painted some water on them, which I then coated in gloss Mod Podge off camera. And with that, we are one step away from completing this awesome model. I think the tiny Lumbridge citizens really gave this model some life, and I can't wait for the big finale. Lumbridge is probably one of the most iconic towns in old school RuneScape. In this episode, I will be finishing a scale model of it. For those new to the series and to those returning, welcome. I really appreciate all the support we received on the series so far. In case you don't remember, this model is approximately 56 tiles across and 72 tiles long. I felt like this captured the main part of Lumbridge while keeping the model to a manageable size. The scale of the model is 1 to 192, and as you watch, I will be explaining some of the modeling process, as well as giving some interesting lore about the area that I'm working on. Make sure and stick around till the end of the video, as I will be giving some information on what's next for the channel and how you can have your say. Today, I will be finishing this model with the Lumbridge Castle. I started off by drawing a rough sketch of the pieces that I would need before cutting them out using my hot wire foam cutter. I haven't shown this part of the process for the last few episodes, but I thought since this is the finale, I should probably show the whole process. went ahead and did some additional cutting with a box cutter. I found that the box cutter usually gives me a bit of a straighter cut than the X-Acto knife since the blade is so much wider. With all of the pieces cut out, I went ahead and marked some of the doors so I can avoid cutting them with the Brick Cutter 1000. As you can see, I've stuck a little piece of foam on the other side of the Brick Cutter 1000 so as to avoid another incident as seen in episode 8. Next, I took a regular ballpoint pen and traced along the cuts I made to define the embossing. I also had an opportunity to use the Brick Cutter 2000 as well on a couple of the castle sections. Once I had all of the sections cut with the brick cutter, I went back with an X-Acto knife and slit each individual brick before going back over them with a pen to emboss it. You could technically skip slitting the foam, but it really helps give a very precise and defined embossing, which is crucial on such a small scale model like this. With all of the bricks embossed, I went ahead and glued all of the castle pieces together using some foam safe super glue. I had considered modeling the interior of the castle as well, but in the end I decided against it because it was going to take a significant amount of time, and I plan on hanging this model on the wall, so having the interior modeled wasn't really going to lend much to the finished product. With the main structure glued together, I added the parapet to the castle with some small strips of XPF foam that I had cut earlier. Once the parapet was dry, I went back and cut and embossed the brick pattern on it, using the same method as before. Depending on what quest you've completed, you'll either find 4 or 5 notable NPCs in this castle: the cook, the crafting tutor, Duke Horatio, and the banking tutor, with the 5th being Sigmund. Sigmund is a member of HAM, or Humans Against Monsters group, and after you complete the Lost Tribe quest, Sigmund is dismissed for treason by the Duke, after trying to create a war between the humans and the Dorgeshan goblins. He ends up being the main antagonist for the Dorgeshan questline, and after you complete another slice of ham, he is no longer with the living. With all of the embossing finished, it was time to give the model a coat of matte Mod Podge to help seal and protect the foam. This really helps lock the embossing in place. While I wait for that to dry, I decided to make some of the castle decorations. I took a thin piece of brass and cut several strips out of it that will later become shields and banners. You can find these small pieces of brass or aluminum at most hobby stores for about $4, and if you're a bit short on funds or just want to recycle, you can also cut the top and bottom off of a soda can or any aluminum can and use that instead. I went ahead and marked out some of the little squares and then marked out the general shape of a shield before cutting them roughly to size with some scissors. I then cleaned them up with a small file. I pinched them with some pliers to give them a bit of a curve before gluing each to the castle. This castle is home to the very first old school RuneScape quest, the Cook's Assistant, where the cook asks you for the ingredients to make a cake for the Duke's birthday party. During the 20th anniversary event, you find out the cook has never successfully baked a cake before, and that is the reason he continues to ask every new player for cake ingredients. The Cook's Assistant is also a prerequisite for Recipe for Disaster quest, which takes place in the Lumbridge Castle dining room. Next, I made some cannons using some extruded polystyrene tubing and sheeting. One of you guys suggested that I use a hole punch to cut the wheels out, and let me tell you, that worked way better than me trying to cut them out by hand like I did in part 8. Once they were all dry, I glued each of them onto the castle. Between the castle and the gatehouse, there's a total of 9 cannons protecting Lumbridge Castle. I used a bamboo skewer to make a couple of barrels, and cut a couple crates out of XPF foam before gluing them into place. Taking some small polystyrene rod, I cut a bunch of tiny logs before gluing them into little bundles on the castle. Let me know in the comments how many of you take the time to light these 4 bundles up whenever you pass by. There is actually 6 bundles of wood up here, but 2 of them are just for decoration. I wanted to add the piles of cannonballs by each of the cannons, so I took some small beads and glued them into piles. And while they do have little holes in them, once they get painted black, you'll hardly even notice. Lastly, I made the banners, again using some polystyrene and the brass I cut earlier. I like to use metal when making banners because it holds its shape when you bend it, allowing me to make a rippling effect that more closely matches what you would see in the game. With everything glued in place, it was time to give the castle a quick coat of black primer. This will provide a good base for when I paint the brickwork. I went and test fit the castle on the hill and noticed that the southwest corner was hanging off a bit, and that I had actually put the stairs 1 tile off so they didn't line up with the kitchen door. Luckily, it's never too late to make some repairs, so I went ahead and smoothed the old stairs out and decided this was a perfect opportunity to blend the hill in as well, as many of you have requested. I took some 2-part epoxy that many refer to as green stuff and mixed it together until it was an even color. Rolling some thin pieces out, I began to fill in the seam between the hill and the base. Many of you recommended that I wet my fingers when working with the green stuff, and that helped immensely to smooth it out. I mixed up some Mod Podge acrylic paint and sand to create a textured paste like I did in part 1, and this helped to further blend the seam. I then took out the static grass applicator once the mud had dried, and some tacky glue, and added some more grass. I usually don't like to use the static grass applicator on finished parts of a model because it makes a bit of a mess, but there really wasn't any way around it, because if I applied the grass in a different way now, it wouldn't match the existing grass as well. You'll probably notice that the new grass looks a bit lighter. That's just the glue showing through though. Eventually it will dry clear, and you won't even be able to tell the difference between the new and the old grass. I wanted to add several more characters to really bring some more life to the model. These are some 1 to 200 scale model train figures that I had, and hopefully I painted them well enough that you'll be able to tell who they are. There are 2 tutors in the Lumbridge Castle. The crafting tutor Cadmus will provide players with different information about crafting at levels 1, 10, and 20, and is standing by a fairly popular spinning wheel due to its proximity to the bank. The second tutor Barb, the banking tutor, this is the only banking tutor in the game and teaches players how the bank and bank pins work. I also went ahead and made the much requested torches for the Goblin house. I really enjoyed Settled's Tile Lock series, so I thought it would be cool to put a little McTile on his starter tile to represent all the new characters starting their journey here in Lumbridge. I also added several woodcutting bots around the only yew tree on the model, since it wouldn't be an authentic model without them. With all of the little extra details added to the model, it is time to finish painting the castle. I started by using a painting technique called dry brushing to paint all of the brickwork. This technique involves dusting layers of lighter and lighter grays onto the piece to bring out all of the little brick details. It's usually a good idea to dry brush first since it's sort of a messy painting method. I decided I better get the magnets glued in real quick so I can let them dry while I'm painting the rest of the castle details. I stuck 4 short toothpicks into the castle before pressing it into position to mark where the magnets would go. I then cut and removed a little foam to create a pocket for each of the magnets. I had to be extra careful that I glued the magnets in the right orientation so they wouldn't repel each other on accident. While those dried, I went ahead and painted all of the little details on the castle. Originally known as the Duke of Lumbridge in RuneScape Classic, Duke Horatio plays a role in numerous old-school RuneScape quests, including Rune Mysteries, Dragon Slayer 1, Recipe for Disaster, Lost Tribe, and Death to the Dorgeshin. He is also a very important character for many players because once you reach a certain point in Dragon Slayer 1, the Duke will hand out anti-dragon shields for free. And there you have it, the castle is all painted, and I know I said it before on part 8, but the blue heraldry really gives the castle a nice pop of color. It's been quite the journey building this model. The channel has completely blown up from just a few subscribers to over 17,000 in just a few short months. I can't express how thankful we are for all the support we've received, and thank you guys again for nominating this project for the Golden Gnomes. They're supposed to be coming in the mail, so hopefully I can post a picture of them with the Lumbridge model soon. So what now? I'm hoping you guys will be able to help me decide what town to build next. I have 3 in mind, and I want you to tell me which one you would like to see the most down in the comments. Your choices are Alcarid, Shiloh Village, or Yanil. In an effort to make it as fair as possible, I'll only be counting each comment, not thumbs up, so people won't be able to vote for more than one town. I'll be counting votes up until midnight of April 28th, 2025, and we'll announce the winning town during a special 1-episode build. Anyways, if you've enjoyed watching and learning all about this iconic town, go ahead and like and subscribe. Thanks for watching.